January 17, 1950, was a cold, ordinary Tuesday night on the dimly lit streets of Boston's North End. Most citizens were homebound, warming themselves against the winter chill, unaware of the shadows lurking in their city. But beneath the surface calm, something daring and dangerous was unfolding. 11 men moved like ghosts through back alleys, driven by greed and the promise of a fortune. They were about to attempt the impossible, the crime of the century, a real-life Ocean's 11 heist so audacious it would stun the nation. In barely half an hour, these men would vanish into the night with $2.7 million in cash, over $30 million today, leaving behind only questions and terror. This is the true story of that legendary robbery, a tale of meticulous planning, nerve-wracking suspense, and the ultimate betrayal that brought it all crashing down. At Brink's headquarters on Prince Street, that ordinary night was about to explode into chaos. Inside the vault room, a few clerks and guards were finishing their day, yawning and glancing at the clock. They believed they were secure behind thick walls and triple-locked doors. Outside, however, the 11 shadows were drawing closer to their prize, ready to prove that no fortress is unbreakable. It all started, as these schemes often do, with one man's obsession. Anthony Pino was a seasoned thief, prowling Boston's North End, known for his cunning, but petty robberies no longer satisfied him. In 1947, Pino set his sights on the unthinkable target, Brink's security depot on Prince Street, the armored car company's secure headquarters. This fortress-like depot, thick brick walls, heavy steel doors, and an alarm system considered state-of-the-art, was reputed to be one of the most secure vaults in America. It was an unbreakable stronghold that held millions in cash and valuables each day. Most criminals wouldn't dare dream of attacking it. But to Pino, Brink's was a tantalizing challenge. If he could crack it, he'd make history and a fortune.
Pino knew he couldn't do a job this big alone. He needed specialists as daring as himself. Quietly, he approached a fellow underworld heavyweight, Joseph Big Joe McGinnis. McGinnis was a legend in Boston's criminal circles, a man who commanded respect and knew every dark alley and speakeasy in the city. Intrigued by Pino's bold plan, McGinnis agreed to help and brought in some muscle. They recruited Joseph Specs O'Keefe and Stanley Gusciora, two notorious stick-up men known for their nerve and skill with a gun. O'Keefe, especially, had a fearless reputation and a hair-trigger temper that made him as dangerous as he was useful. These two would be the enforcers if anyone got in their way. Next, they added lookouts and getaway drivers, the eyes and wheels of the operation. Pino enlisted his brother-in-law Vincent Costa to be the lookout. Costa could blend into the cityscape and signal them when the time was right. For a getaway driver, they chose Joseph Banfield, a quiet but reliable wheelman who could handle a fast escape. Rounding out the crew were a handful of Pino's trusted associates from the North End underworld: Adolph Maffei, Michael Gagan, Thomas Richardson, James Faherty, and Henry Baker. In total, 11 men agreed to join what would later be dubbed Boston's Perfect Crime. Each had his own criminal expertise, and each had the same motivation: a hunger for a life-changing payday that just might be worth the risk. Over the next 2 years, the crew planned the caper to the last detail. Pino spent night after night watching the Brink's depot from the shadows, studying schedules and routines. He learned exactly when the vault was opened and how many guards were on duty at different times. The vault was on the second floor behind 5 locked doors, a daunting obstacle. But Pino devised a patient, brilliant solution. One by one, on quiet evenings, the gang surreptitiously entered Brink's after hours and stole the lock's cylinders. They took each lock cylinder to a secret workshop, crafted a perfect key for it, and then returned the cylinder before anyone noticed it was missing. Through this methodical scheme, they obtained working keys to every door of the depot without raising an alarm.
There were a few close calls, like the night a Brink's janitor nearly stumbled upon O'Keefe crouched in a dark hallway with a lock cylinder in hand. The crew held their breath in the shadows until the oblivious worker moved on. Each small break-in was nerve-wracking, but their luck held, and their tampering went unnoticed. The crew also prepared the tools of their escape. They stole a green Ford truck to transport the loot and stashed it in a safe location. In the months leading up to the heist, they drove practice runs throughout Boston, memorizing a getaway route through side streets and alleys. By the end of 1949, each man knew exactly where to go and how to vanish into the city's maze within minutes. For good measure, they assembled disguises that would make them nearly unrecognizable. Each man had a dark navy pea coat, a chauffeur's cap, gloves, and a grotesque rubber Halloween mask covering his face. If anyone saw them, all they'd remember were eerie, identical figures with featureless faces, impossible to identify. They made several dry runs, coming right to Brink's doorstep and then backing out, waiting for the perfect moment. The night before the chosen day, none of them slept deeply. They were too close now. Some passed the hours cleaning their guns or pacing anxiously, minds racing through every step of the plan. Pino remained cool and confident, but others fought back creeping doubts about what could go wrong. They reassured each other with a simple truth. They had come too far to turn back now. At last, that moment came on the frigid evening of January 17, 1950. The team had intelligence that the vault would be open and lightly guarded just after 7 p.m. Everything was ready. It was time to strike. That night, the gang gathered at a safe house in Roxbury for final preparations. They donned their menacing costumes, each man transforming into a faceless ghoul in a pea coat and mask, and loaded their guns. At about 7 p.m., they set off. The truck rumbled toward downtown Boston with its headlights dimmed. As they neared Prince Street, the narrow cobblestone lanes of the North End were largely deserted. Just a few lights in apartment windows and a stray cat slinking along the curb. The men in the back of the truck exchanged tense glances. This was it. They pulled up near Brink's, engine idling quietly in the alley. Upon arrival, Vincent Costa took up his lookout post on a rooftop across the street. The others waited in the truck, hearts thudding in their chests. A few minutes later, Costa signaled with a quick flash of his flashlight. The vault was open, and only a few employees were inside. It was time to move. The crew crept to the side door and quietly let themselves in with their copied keys. In perfect silence, they navigated corridor after corridor until they reached the vault room. Suddenly, 11 masked figures burst into the room, weapons drawn. The 5 Brink's employees froze in shock at the sight of gunmen in grotesque masks. In seconds, the robbers barked orders for everyone to get on the floor. Any thought of resistance evaporated when Specs O'Keefe pressed the cold barrel of his .38 revolver to the back of a guard's head. One by one, the employees were forced down and swiftly bound with rope. Strong hands taped their mouths shut. The terrified guards could hear their own hearts pounding in the silence. Faces pressed to the cold floor, some silently prayed that the gunman would take the money and spare their lives. The victims could only watch in helpless terror as the intruders wordlessly took control. Working with practiced efficiency, the gang got to work emptying the vault. Adrenaline surged through their veins. One man's hands trembled as he shoveled wads of cash into a sack, his eyes wide behind his rubber mask. They hauled out canvas bags and stuffed them with stacks of cash, bundles of checks, and payroll envelopes, anything of value. Pino and McGinnis oversaw the operation coolly, checking their watches. They knew they had to be quick. Within about 35 minutes, the robbers had filled numerous sacks with millions of dollars in loot. They didn't bother with the mountains of coins, too heavy and slow to carry, but took everything else they could. It was the biggest score any of them had ever seen, and not a single alarm had gone off.
Without a word, the thieves signaled to wrap it up. They hustled out the way they came, carrying the bulging bags. As a final touch, they locked the doors behind them, leaving their bound victims trapped. In their haste, one man's cap fell to the floor, a lone clue left behind, but otherwise the gang left no trace except the ropes and tape on the employees. Outside, the crew melted into the darkness of the alley and split up. Several men loaded the money bags into the truck and drove off into the night along their pre-planned route. Others vanished on foot into back streets to rendezvous later and establish their alibis. Within minutes, the Brink's building was as silent as it had been before, as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until about 7:37 p.m., roughly 10 minutes after the robbers had fled, that one desperate Brink's clerk managed to wriggle free from his bonds and raise the alarm. He stumbled outside, shouting that Brink's had been robbed. But by then, Pino and his men were long gone. As the first police sirens began to wail in the distance, the thieves were already congratulating each other in hushed voices, marveling at how perfectly everything had gone. In their minds, they'd just pulled off the impossible, the perfect heist. Later that night, the gang regrouped at a secret hideout to divvy up and hide the spoils. They toasted their success with whiskey and nervous laughter, elated by how smoothly it all had gone. In that victorious moment, each man believed they had gotten away with the impossible. Yet even as they celebrated, a shadow hung over the room. 11 criminals now shared a monumental secret and a mountain of cash. And with that came a flicker of doubt. Could they truly trust each other to keep quiet for years? None of them said it out loud, but the thought was there in every man's eyes. If anyone talked, it would all be over. The stakes were just as high now as they were before the heist. In the chaos that followed, Boston police and FBI agents swarmed the Brink's building. They arrived to find the employees shaken and still bound, but little else. The robbers had vanished without a trace. The victims could only describe their assailants as professional, masked, and eerily quiet. The only physical evidence left behind was a discarded chauffeur's cap and the tape and ropes used to tie them up. Brink's, desperate to recover its losses and reputation, offered a whopping $100,000 reward for information leading to the culprits, an unheard-of sum that set off a frenzy of rumors and tips. Even FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover himself was pressuring his agents to crack what the press was calling the crime of the century, the largest robbery in U.S. history at the time. Boston was on edge. How had thieves pulled off such an audacious job right under everyone's noses? Rumors flew, and every barroom and newspaper in town buzzed with theories. But real evidence was scarce. Agents chased down every lead, but the robbers had planned well. Weeks passed with no solid break until a witness recalled seeing a green truck with a canvas top oddly parked near Brink's around the time of the crime. That tip paid off. In early March 1950, investigators discovered the stripped remains of a green Ford stake-bed truck dumped in a junkyard in Stoughton, Massachusetts. It was the getaway truck, cut into pieces. The choice of dumping ground was a mistake. Stoughton was near the hometown of two prime suspects, Specs O'Keefe and Stanley Gusiora. Both men were well-known Boston hoodlums and, importantly, associates of Tino. Suddenly, O'Keefe and Gusiora, who had already been on the FBI's radar, found themselves under intense scrutiny. O'Keefe and Gusiora were hauled in for interrogation. Under hours of hard questioning, they coolly stuck to a simple story. They claimed they'd been out drinking together on the night of January 17th. They couldn't name where or provide any witnesses, but they also never cracked. With no concrete evidence or eyewitnesses to tie them to the robbery, authorities had to release the pair. In the meantime, investigators quietly kept tabs on Pino, McGinnis, and the rest of their circle. They noticed something peculiar. Every one of these men had a hazy alibi for that night, a story that placed them somewhere else around 7 p.m., but never accounted for the critical 7:10–7:30 window during which the heist occurred. It was enough to raise eyebrows.
but not enough to make an arrest. As months turned into years, the Brink's case threatened to go cold. The robbers stayed mum and avoided any flashy spending that might draw attention. All the while, the crew was watching the calendar and each other. They had all sworn to stay quiet and stick together until time ran out. In hushed conversations, some even vowed to kill anyone in the crew who dared talk. It was a dark pact, but for a long time everyone held to it. If they could reach January 1956 without being charged, the statute of limitations would expire and they'd be untouchable. It became a high-stakes waiting game between the gang and the FBI.
But not everyone in the crew could lie low. In June 1950, barely 6 months after the heist, O'Keefe and Gusiora got themselves arrested for an unrelated burglary in Pennsylvania. O'Keefe was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and Gusiora to as much as 20 years. Two key members of the Brink's gang suddenly found themselves behind bars for a different crime entirely. At first glance, this seemed like good news for Pino's crew. With O'Keefe and Gusiora tucked away, they'd be less likely to draw attention or cause trouble. On the other hand, prison is expensive. Lawyers, appeals, favors, and the pair fully expected their old partners to support their legal fight. From his Pennsylvania jail cell, O'Keefe sent word back to Boston demanding financial help. He had entrusted his share of the Brink's loot to his friend Adolph Maffei for safekeeping before his arrest, and now he wanted that money front and center for his legal defense. By all accounts, O'Keefe had already burned through whatever cash he still controlled on attorney fees, while the rest of the gang quietly sat on their hidden fortunes. At first, Pino's crew did send O'Keefe a trickle of cash to keep him appeased. But as the months rolled by, resentment simmered on both sides. The gang hated parting with the money they'd risked their necks for, just to bail O'Keefe out of his own missteps. O'Keefe, meanwhile, stewed over what he saw as a betrayal. He began to suspect that his partners might be perfectly happy to let him rot in prison, maybe even keep his share of the loot for themselves. By 1954, O'Keefe had finished his sentence and returned to Boston, and he was furious. The first thing he wanted was his cut of the Brink score. His former allies offered him nothing but excuses, which only fed his anger. In the spring of 1954, O'Keefe snapped. With the help of an associate, he kidnapped Vincent Costa, Pino's brother-in-law and the Brink's lookout, at gunpoint. They held Costa captive in a motel room for 2 days, while O'Keefe demanded that Pino hand over O'Keefe's missing money. In that cramped room, O'Keefe's rage boiled over. He pressed the muzzle of his pistol under Costa's chin and hissed, "I know you guys hid my share. Where is it?" Costa, trembling and pale, swore he didn't know. O'Keefe's eyes blazed. By now, he was beyond reason, out for blood. After 2 days, Pino did scrape together a small ransom to secure Costa's release, but the damage was done. O'Keefe had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. He had become a dangerous wild card, willing to turn on his own crew. It was now a race between O'Keefe's wrath and the gang's desperation. After the Costa incident, Pino was livid. His own family had been dragged into this mess. O'Keefe had to be dealt with. Pino and the others decided that O'Keefe had to be eliminated before he brought them all down. In June 1954, as O'Keefe sat in his parked car one evening, a hitman sent by his former friends crept up and opened fire. Bullets shattered O'Keefe's windshield, sending glass shards flying as he instinctively ducked. If he hadn't moved in that split second, one of those bullets would have blown his head off. O'Keefe survived that attempt, but the hunters weren't finished. Just 2 days later, another gunman ambushed O'Keefe on a street corner. A muzzle flashed, bang, and a bullet slammed into O'Keefe's chest. He crumpled to the ground.
gasping as pain seared through his body. The hitman fled, assuming O'Keefe was as good as dead, yet by sheer luck or stubborn will, O'Keefe clung to life and somehow survived again. Bleeding and terrified, O'Keefe realized Boston was now a death trap. With what strength he had left, he slipped out of the city, heading south to hide with out-of-town relatives. Not long after, police caught him in Rhode Island for violating parole by carrying a gun and tossed him back in jail. Ironically, being behind bars likely saved his life. At least there, he was safe from his crew's assassins. By late 1955, O'Keefe sat in his cell, nursing a burning grudge. He replayed in his mind how they had all celebrated together after the heist, dreaming of Easy Street. And now, those very same friends had left him with nothing but scars and bitterness. His old partners had taken his money, tried to kill him, and left him to take the fall alone. On the outside, Pino's crew was fraying under the pressure, nervously counting down the weeks to the 6-year deadline. The FBI, well aware of the bad blood within the gang, continued to prod O'Keefe gently during prison visits. O'Keefe spent many sleepless nights wrestling with himself. All his life, he had lived by the outlaw code. Never snitch on your friends. But where were those friends now? They were free, enjoying the money he'd nearly died for, while he sat in a cell with a bullet scar on his chest. The more he thought about the nights he spent bleeding and the silence from his old crew, the more his loyalty curdled into fury. By early 1956, that fury finally outweighed his fear of breaking the code. On January 6, 1956, with just days left before the case would slip beyond the law's reach, O'Keefe finally broke. He sat down with FBI agents and in a weary but determined voice uttered the fateful words, "All right, what do you want to know?" With that one sentence, the mystery of the great Brink's robbery was blown wide open. Over hours of confession, O'Keefe spilled the entire story, naming every name and detailing every step, from the first planning meetings to the final getaway. He held nothing back. After nearly 6 years of frustrated investigation, the authorities suddenly had what they needed. Armed with O'Keefe's testimony, authorities moved fast. On January 12, 1956, a mere 5 days before the 6-year limit would run out, FBI agents and Boston police launched a series of coordinated raids. Anthony Pino, Joseph McGinnis, Adolph Maffei, Henry Baker, Michael Geegan, and Vincent Costa were all rounded up in one whirlwind evening. The men were utterly stunned. In their minds, they had been just days away from getting away with everything. They truly believed they were home free. 2 other gang members, James Farity and Thomas Richardson, managed to slip away in the initial sweep and went on the run, but they didn't get far. Within a few months, both were tracked down and arrested as well. Agents found Farity and Richardson holed up in a shabby apartment in Dorchester, sleeping on bare mattresses with a couple of pistols by their side. The fugitives surrendered without a fight, their brief taste of life on the run over. The only member of the original 11 who wasn't in handcuffs by mid-1956 was Stanley Gusciora, and that was only because he had died in prison of natural causes before he could be charged. In August 1956, the Brink's robbers finally faced justice in a Massachusetts courtroom. By now, the case was national news, and spectators packed the gallery to witness the fate of the men who had nearly gotten away with $2.7 million. On the stand, the star witness was none other than Specs O'Keefe. With a mix of defiance and bitterness, O'Keefe recounted the entire plot in front of his former friends, pointing a finger at each of his old comrades and coolly describing exactly what they had done. The defendants shifted in their seats as O'Keefe spoke. Some of them stared daggers at their one-time comrade. Others looked down at the floor in shame and disbelief. Not long ago, these men had been like brothers, trusting each other with their lives. Now they sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, their brotherhood shattered. It was the ultimate act of betrayal, and it sealed the defendants' fates. All 8 men on trial were swiftly convicted on a host of charges. When the guilty verdicts were read, a few of the men cursed and shouted in frustration, while others simply stared at the floor, knowing it was truly over. Most received life sentences for armed robbery and conspiracy. O'Keefe, who had cut a deal, got a relatively light sentence of 4 years. He had broken the code of silence, but from his perspective, his old comrades had broken it first, by turning on him. Even with the culprits behind bars, one puzzle remained. Where was all the money? The Brink's gang had stolen nearly $2.7 million, and the vast majority was still unaccounted for. In the months after the trial, small bits of the loot surfaced in curious ways. In Baltimore, police arrested a man for passing suspicious old $10 bills. Under interrogation, the man admitted he got them from an associate known as Fat Joe. Agents tracked Fat Joe to a rundown row house and searched it top to bottom. Behind a false wall in the basement, they pried open a hidden metal container, and there it was, a pile of Brink's money. Nearly $60,000 in cash lay inside, much of it wet and rotting from years of concealment. It was a thrilling find, but just a drop in the bucket. Over $1 million of the Brink's fortune was never recovered. Some say Pino and McGinnis hid it too well. Perhaps it's still out there, buried in some forgotten hiding place, waiting to be discovered even now. Others suspect it was quietly spent or lost over the years, as the gang waited in vain for their day of freedom. To this day, that missing money remains a tantalizing mystery.
The Great Brink's robbery went down in history as a near-perfect crime. Meticulously planned, daringly executed, and for a time completely unsolved. In the end, though, it was undone from within. The robbers' own greed and fear destroyed the trust between them. They succeeded in taking the money, but they couldn't hold their partnership together when it mattered most. A plan is only as good as the people who carry it out. And in this case, the lure of riches proved stronger than loyalty. In the end, it wasn't a detective or a fingerprint that broke the case. The gang effectively caught themselves through greed and betrayal. The tale of Brink's is a thrilling lesson that even among thieves, betrayal can be the ultimate undoing of even the most perfect plan. It's no wonder Hollywood later turned this saga into hit movies. The drama of this real-life Ocean's 11 proved that truth is stranger than fiction. For 6 long years they had outsmarted the law, but in the end they could not escape their own flaws. If you enjoyed this story, and we hope you did, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating heists and true crime tales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.